This is the Church of St. Paul in the Desert.
In the name of God, Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer. Amen. You may have noticed that there are lots of really difficult and challenging statements and issues in our long gospel reading this morning, so I thought we'd take a look at Paul's epistle instead. Actually, I will come back to the gospel, and I think, in a way, it all hangs together. The reading from Paul to the Corinthian church is addressed, as I think we know, to a very conflicted and contentious bunch. There was a lot of conflict and partyism in the Corinthian church. They were a mess, frankly. And yet, for all of that, throughout the epistle, Paul ends his, at least this paragraph, in addressing this contentious church with this sentence right at the last sentence of our reading today. For we are God's servants working together. You are God's field, God's building, working together. You may have noticed that we live in a world of an enormous amount of contention, division, conflict, misunderstanding, all of that stuff. This is not news. I suppose the only question is it really worse than before? But it's not new. Indeed, it's part of our common language now in our country to talk about with great disgust the inability of our Congress to get anything done because it's so polarized and nothing seems to happen and things can't get through and so forth and so on. This is part of our palaver now. And beyond that, there are many places where we feel those contrasts, those conflicts. Those who are concerned for gun control and those who aren't. Those who are red and those who are blue. Arab persons and Jewish persons in the Middle East. Those who are incredibly wealthy and those who are getting less wealthy by the minute. Those who are concerned and want health care for everyone and those who somehow don't want that. Oh, and by the way, did I mention Syria? We are in a world of enormous conflict. The word that I think the sociologists might use to apply to some of this is tribalism. Now, there's nothing wrong with being a part of a particular tribe or group. But tribalism says that's when it gets to where, I think my tribe is better than your tribe. I think my tribe is going to win and your tribe's going to lose. My tribe wants more territory or more money, and you're going to have to give it up or we're going to fight. That's tribalism, groups against groups. It explains a good deal of the awfulness of the evening news and the local gossip as well. Even the Olympics, which are really a wonderful thing, when you think about it, why are all those people there from all those different tribes around the world? They're there to compete and to see who gets the medals and who doesn't. Well, that's the kind of world we're in. Now, you would think, of course, that this does not apply or ever happen in the church, right? Well, that should be the way it is, but here we have Paul addressing a congregation in Corinth in the first century that has been ripped apart by partyism and factions, and it seems to resolve around loyalties to particular people, clergy leaders, others. I'm for Apollos, I'm for Cephas, I'm for Peter, I'm for this, I'm for that, I'm with this guy, I like him, I don't like him. And apparently it got to the point where it's pretty serious, it's a mess. And it wasn't just in Corinth. We have our mild versions of this or things that can lead to it. How often do we say things like, well, I was baptized by Father so-and-so. Or, I was confirmed by Bishop what's-his-name, as if that makes any difference in the world who did it. Much worse, a terrible verbal habit we have of describing churches in terms of who the priest is. Oh, that's Father so-and-so's church, or that's the Reverend Canon so-and-so's congregation. Terrible habit. Terrible habit. Well, there's an old joke about authority in the life of the church. Goes something like this. What is the final authority in church, the final word? Well, if you're a Protestant, of course, the final authority is the Bible. If you're a Roman Catholic, the final authority is the Pope. If you're an Episcopalian, the final authority is the last rector. And that really comes to the fore when there are changes of rectors and all those loyalties bubble up and complex and mess up everything like in Corinth. The church has its own forms of little tribes, which are not bad in themselves, but you can see where they could get out of hand, possibly, and have in the past in our history. There's the evangelical tribe, and then there's the Catholic tribe. There are the 8 o'clockers and the 10:30ers. There's the social gospel folks out there doing social action, and there's the contemplatives who want to pray. There's those who love Bible study and those who prefer liturgy and worship. There are those who love one kind of church music and those who love another kind of church music. There are high church and low church. It goes on and on. There are many, many little tribes in the life of the church. None of them bad in themselves. But it's a potential problem. I have in my library at home a couple of packets of prayer books, a prayer book from the Civil War for the soldiers. One is for the Confederate Army, one is for the Union Army. They're absolutely different. There's Confederate prayers, there's Union prayers, even though these people are all supposedly Christians. Well, St. Paul looks over the scene at Corinth and says, you know, you people are really immature. It is not a sign of Christian health or maturity to have all these factions and arguments and alignments and alliances and on and this and that and parking lot meetings about who's going to do what to whom. It's very immature. You folks are at the milk level. You're not ready for solid food, let alone a Big Mac. You just aren't there. You've got to go back to basics. So going back to basics brought my mind to the most basic thing that happens in our lives as Christian people. And that most basic thing, the most important sacrament that ever happens for each of us is holy baptism. That's the initiation rite that brings us into this crazy tribe called the church. And unfortunately, probably most of us don't remember our baptisms. It was long ago. Unfortunately, baptism gets overlaid with a lot of confusion, sentimentality, and misunderstanding, partly because it didn't happen recently, at least for us. There's a classic story that I enjoy about that, about an evangelical preacher who was at a lake in a park, baptizing away in the lake, as they're wont to do outdoors. And out of the corner of his eye, the preacher looked up and saw this gentleman who was obviously quite inebriated, sort of staggering down the knoll, curious to what's going on down there in that lake. And he wanders up, and the preacher thinks to himself, oh, here's a chance to have a dramatic addition to my tribe. He says, sir, would you like to find Jesus? And the drunken gentleman says, well, sure. Well, come on down. You know, and he's thinking, this is going to be really dramatic. You know, they like that kind of thing. So he brings the gentleman down into the water, and he plunges him down, and he pulls him back up, and he spits water, and he says, brother, did you find Jesus? And the drunken gentleman says, nope. Well, we'll try again. You know, this could make it more dramatic. So he plunges him down a second time and holds him down, brings him up, and he shakes water. And, well, now, brother, this time, did you find Jesus down there? And he said, nope, I can't say that I did, Reverend. Well, now it's almost to the embarrassment point, but one more time should do it. So he plunges him a third time, holds him down a little bit longer, pulls him back up, he shakes water, shakes his head, and the preacher says, now, brother, did you find Jesus this time? And the drunken gentleman says, are you sure this is where he fell in? It's a good one. I'm afraid we fall into a lot of weird things about baptism, and we need to recover what it's really all about. In the last 30, 40, 50 years, it's hard to identify, there has been a mass movement across much of the church to recover the centrality of baptism and why it's so important. That is the basic commissioning for ministry for all Christians. I want to say that Victoria Hatch and I worked together in this project for the Diocese of Los Angeles in a very intense way. beginning, in fact, usually starts with small churches who don't know what to do when they don't have enough money for the priest. And we worked in St. John's Needles, which was my first parish. By the way, I can tell you that Needles is even hotter than Palm Springs. Anyway, out of that mission, that movement has come exciting things that now we somewhat are beginning to take for granted. I was thinking today of Jim Kelsey, who was the Bishop of Northern Michigan, a very remote, beautiful diocese up above the Michigan Peninsula. It's the Upper Peninsula. And Jim was one of the leaders in this movement across the national church, who sadly died several years ago now in a traffic accident, apparently after a visitation. Somehow the car went off the road. I don't think we know the exact details. But Jim was known as the person, if you went into his office in Marquette, Michigan, the diocesan office, the bishop's office, the only certificate you saw on the wall was not college degrees or even ordination certificates or Thanksgiving certificates or honorary thises or that's or honorable mentions. The only thing on his wall was one large baptismal certificate. Because Jim believed and lived out what he believed, that baptism is the central thing that happens to us all. And I'm told, because I was not there, but when he died, at the wake or viewing the day before in another parish that was larger to accommodate the folks, as you walked in toward the casket, they had his baptismal certificate leaning up against his casket, a sign of who Jim was and what he meant to the church. Baptism is what it's all about. And I think you might see the church in a new light, and that's what was the intent, by the way, because really, when you get down to it, this is sort of some theology here, but there's really only one priest. There's only one priest that exists, and that's Jesus the Christ, risen from the dead. We all participate in that priesthood through our baptism. We're all a share in that ministry by virtue of our baptism, not ordination. That's something later for those of us who are crazy enough to do it. And you can image the church, instead of it being a pyramid or a hierarchy, which has been our traditional image, top-heavy with big people up here and more people down here and so forth. Forget that image. It's not very biblical or anything else. Think of the church now as a circle, a big circle. And around on this circle are all the baptized people, like you. And on that circle are baptized people who are doing their ministries according to the gifts and skills and talents that God has given them. And yes, there's a priest there, there's a deacon there, there's a bishop there, there are music people there are choir members there are administrators, there are youth workers, there are maintenance people, outreach people, you name it, all the ministries that the church needs and the world needs, they're all on this circle. And this circle of the baptized, this image of the church, is surrounding, and here's the key phrase, this circle surrounds not the minister, but the ministry of Christ. Did you get that? I'm going to repeat it. We're not gathered around the minister, but the ministry of Jesus Christ, something we all share. That's the more authentic vision of what church means. And it also means that when we are baptized, and you don't remember perhaps, you took on a new identity, speaking of tribes and tribalism. You were given a new identity, sacramentalized by a physical act where the sign of the cross was made on your forehead, often associated with oil, which represents the universal church because it's been blessed by the bishop. But that sign or consignation or sealing is your brand. Analogous indeed in the early days of the church when animals and yes, even humans were branded so you knew who they belonged to. Well, we've been branded and we know who we belong to. And that mark, that seal, is permanent. No one, no plastic surgeon can remove it from your body. Whether you practice the faith or not, you have been marked forever, and that is who you are. Our common language is so incorrect when we talk about, well, I was baptized Baptist, I was baptized Catholic, I was baptized Episcopalian, I was baptized Lutheran. That's nonsense. No one's baptized into a denomination or another tribe. You were baptized into Christ. That's what Paul is saying to the Corinthians. It's about Christ, not about Apollos and Cephas and all these characters and vestry people and clergy. They're not important. What matters is Christ. That's our new identity. And that means, if we understand this, then we know that primarily and essentially, you and I are not Republicans and Democrats. We are not liberals or conservatives. We are not Caucasians or Mongols or Asians. We are not Northerners or Southerners. We are not Californians or Georgians. We are not from the east or the west or the north and the south. We are in Christ, period. End of tribalism. It doesn't mean that those other things may not be true about you, but they're not nearly as important. And that is the basis by which we come back to what God is calling all of humanity to represent. Remember, he shared humanity in that thing called Bethlehem. So, that brings us to the gospel and that little statement about gifts on the altar. And by the way, that is our unity, of course. We are united not because we have the same experiences. We're not an experiential church, and some are. You have to have the same experiences, speaking in tongues or a renewal experience or whatever. We're not an experiential church, nor are we a confessional church, where we have to confess the same beliefs about when's the second coming or how to take the Bible or what age for baptism or whether dancing's okay or not. We're not that kind of a church. We have different beliefs and different experiences. Our unity is based on the fact that we are pragmatic or liturgical. We do the same thing together. And what do? We eat and drink together at God's table, all of us. That's what makes us one. We are a pragmatic church. So, in the gospel, Jesus says, before you get here, if you are in brokenness with another person, if you're mad at somebody, significant mad, if you are out of sync or hurt or something's wrong, first go and deal with that and be reconciled to your brother or sister, and then bring your gift to the altar. Makes perfect sense. This is the proof text for the passing of the peace, by the way, and why we do it where we do it. First, we have the liturgy of the word, which is what's happening right now. Then we say our prayers and intercessions for others. Then we confess our sins, and then we make a sign of peace, an outward sign that we are of one unity, one tribe, and therefore we can then set the table for dinner. Analogous to at home, if you are out of sorts with someone or just had a shootout, ideally you'd like to heal that up before you sit down to dinner. Same thing. It's not what we do at the end of the service. That's fellowship. That's something else, also wonderful. Bear in mind that, if Jesus could have in his original company Simon the Zealot from a nationalist cloak and dagger bunch, which is where he would have been coming from if he was a zealot. Presumably he wasn't doing that after he met Jesus, but if he was out of that party that was angry and hateful toward the Romans and would kill at the drop of a hat, and then you have Matthew the tax collector, who is the epitome of collaboration with the occupying force. If Matthew and Simon can be in the same outfit, the same tribe, then we can do just as well. A personal note over the years as I've given communion to people in other parishes, I've always been amazed how on Sunday morning people will come up to the rail like we do here, and here will be one person who I know has incredibly passionate, strong opinions about some issue, some tribalistic battle that's been going on in the church or the world. And then next to them on a given Sunday, here's someone else who has exactly the opposite passions, feelings, and opinions. And if they knew about each other, they'd probably have quite a little shootout, or at least it would be lively. And here they are, unbeknownst to themselves, kneeling at the same cotton-picking altar rail, unknown to each other, because maybe they just don't talk to each other. And here I am giving communion to both of these people, the same rail, and I always think God has an incredible sense of humor. He can really handle us all. So, what is our mission in the face of all of that? Simply to say that it is the proclamation of God's people, the church, who represents all of God's people, that even though there are conflicts galore, divisions and disagreements and misunderstandings and all kinds of battles going on in the world, mentally or physically or otherwise. The fact is, the gospel is, there is only one tribe on the face of the earth. There is only one tribe. The world doesn't know that yet. That's why they're still fighting. Our job is to represent what God intends for his creation and humanity. There is only one tribe. And as I look at those Olympics and all that ceremony, the good part to me, and the best part, is that all those nations presenting themselves at the opening ceremony, they all come walking in with their different costumes and their different flags and all the different cheering and all that stuff, and they all come from different parts of the earth, most parts of the earth, it seems. And all of them there, large or small, one athlete, 230 athletes, who cares? There they all are in the same playing field before they get into all the battles about who wins the medals and who loses the medals. That's the best part of the Olympics. God's people all together on the same playing field. Our mission as Christian people is to proclaim to the world, no matter who they are, no matter what your costume looks like or how big or strong or little you are or where you come from, God believes that every one of us already has a gold medal. We are servants working together in God's field. Amen.